Welcome to the Ben and Tony podcast. Today we have a special guest, Dave Nemetz. Dave is the founder of Bleacher Report, Inverse, and GM of Culture and Innovation at Bustle Digital Group. So you might have heard of Bleacher Report, one of the most popular sports websites in the world. It was started in 2007 and eventually sold to Turner for $175 million. From Bleacher Report to Inverse to his current role at Bustle Digital Group, Dave has always been at the epicenter of media and entertainment. He's also an active investor, startup advisor, and a huge fan of the Grateful Dead and Fish. So, if you're a sports fan, you have definitely heard of Bleacher Report. And as the founder, Dave Nemetz has firsthand experience building one of the most successful media companies of the last 2 decades. He's remained at the forefront of media, and you should pay attention to his expert analysis on the evolution of the industry. He has some killer insights, and anyone with an interest in digital media, building an audience, and the future of content should listen to this. Hope you enjoyed the episode.
From sneaking off on his work breaks to take calls for his side hustle, which was later to become the Bleacher Report, all the way through to building desks in his office out of old doors in a nod to Bezos, Dave has really lived his own philosophy of if you find yourself stuck climbing the career ladder, get off and build an elevator. And what a sizable elevator it is that he built. Dave sold the Bleacher Report for 175 million, something that isn't obvious through his innately humble and down-to-earth attitude. So anyone who's looking to build a new media company, to build a community, he did it way before it was hip, or even just to understand the journey of entrepreneurship, this one ought to be a really good listen.
And we're very, very excited to be sponsored by the Making Lemonade Fund, Gen Z's fastest growing fundraiser, supporting COVID-19 relief, pediatric cancer, and a bunch of other great causes. Get behind them over at makinglemonadefund.com and sponsor Made by our very own Jesse K.
And now onto the podcast where we're going to be joined by Dave Nemetz.
Hey guys, thanks for having me.
Awesome. We got some really interesting transitions and moments of your life that we're going to go through today. I got three, but maybe before the first one, leading up to that, let's take a picture of what Dave was like maybe in college, leading up to your first job and then going to Bleacher Report. But when you were younger, what was your motivation? Were you interested in media? What were you thinking when Dave Nemetz was in college?
So yeah, that's a good place to start.
Yeah.
Growing up, I was always interested in being creative. Always interested in entertainment. I wanted to be a filmmaker or a producer. So I went to college. I went to film school and studied at USC for that, and it just immersed myself in the world of film. And that was really what I had my sights set on, and always been also just a huge consumer of all things media, movies, music, yeah, just a huge consumer of everything on the internet. Yeah, even going back to a very early age. So that was kind of the breeding ground that I was in, and yeah, I went to school in LA, so had yeah, a lot of exposure to the entertainment industry there, and just living in a very culturally diverse area.
Awesome. And it sounds like after you graduated from college, your first job was kind of setting the stage for your first major moment in transition, which was starting Bleacher Report. So can you tell us a story about, so what happened after Dave, when you graduated from college, first job, and what was going through your head in that story in that time period?
Yeah. So shortly after graduating from school, I ended up taking a job at Endeavor, which at the time was one of the top 3 or 4 talent agencies, just not representing not just the talent that you see on screen, but writers and showrunners and producers and really the whole gamut. Endeavor has since they've merged with William Morris. They became WME. Now it's Endeavor again. So it's maybe a different thing. It was a little bit more, had more of a startup feel back then because it was kind of the new agency in town, but it was still very much a force to be reckoned with, I guess. And the reason I took the job there was because the entertainment industry was, it was an established thing where you don't always have to, but there are gatekeepers that you often have to go through in order to get your foot in the door and to climb the rungs of the ladder. Certainly, people have made it other ways. You can self-finance and produce your own film and submit it to festivals and do all that. But I was already there, immersed in the entertainment industry through being at USC. I had friends who were there and were climbing the ladder as well. So I saw this as the path for me.
Yeah.
to get in and start to work my way up in the entertainment industry. And it was a fascinating experience that was just super interesting to kind of be a fly on the wall.
Yeah.
Because you start when you're starting an agency, you start at the bottom. You start in the mailroom. You're literally pushing a cart around, delivering mail, and then you get promoted a rung to being an assistant for an agent, where you're sitting behind a desk, making phone calls, managing their schedule, all that type of stuff. So it was, but you start to kind of absorb all this stuff happening. But so that I was doing that on the one hand, but then in my own time on the side, or even when I was at work and things weren't so busy, I was working on building Bleacher Report.
Yeah.
So doing something completely my own and that I was in complete control of. So it was a really interesting dichotomy to have kind of, one foot in each of those worlds.
I'd love to know, like, was there a spark of inspiration that caused you to start Bleacher Report? Like, was there a moment? Did it just happen naturally? Was it like some friends, you guys just thought this is a good idea? And was that like part of a big term plan, or was it just like a hobby? I just love to know the inception of Bleacher Report and how that came about.
Yeah. So it happened very, very organically. I started it with a group of friends who I'd gone to high school with, and it started as kind of this conversation. I remember getting an email shortly after I graduated college from my friend Dave, one of my co-founders, basically saying, it was very, very vague, like, hey, I've got this idea, we should start a sports website, and I want to talk to you about it. And it was, I just graduated from college. I was actually backpacking around Europe at the time, so I was probably sitting at some internet cafe in Prague or Switzerland or something like that. And I got this email, and I said, well, sure, let's talk about it. We coordinated times and figuring out how to talk to each other, and a couple other friends were on it as well. And we started talking about it. Kind of the general gist was, hey, we're all huge sports fans. We know our teams better than anyone else, and especially we had all gone to pretty big sports colleges, so we lived on these campuses. We knew some of the big athletes. We could provide a perspective that the ESPNs of the world couldn't provide. So what if we started a sports website? We'd write for it. We'd get our friends in similar positions to write for it, and we'd have this really interesting perspective. So we started to talk about that, and then over time it snowballed into thinking about it like, hey, what if it wasn't just us doing this? What if it was, we started out with a user-generated content model. What if we opened it up to all fans who had this perspective? And what if we created a platform? And over time, it evolved and evolved, but it started as this very organic project of, hey, let's do this. We'll start this on the side. We didn't really know what we were doing, and we didn't really think of it as a business. It was just something that we wanted to have, and so we created it.
I love that. And this was kind of before community was kind of fashionable, cool. How do you actually kind of build a community from scratch and start recruiting and make it feel vibrant to those other users that you want to contribute?
Yeah, so this was when we started working on it. This was 2006 was the first. We had that initial conversation in 2005, and then if we took a little bit of time to get our act together. So we launched the first iteration of Bleacher Report in 2006. So yeah, this was very early days. It was kind of when the web was awakening from its slumber after things being pretty quiet after the .com boom, and but things were happening. YouTube had just emerged. Wikipedia was like a really big deal for the first time, and people were having their minds blown that there was this free encyclopedia that was being managed by volunteers. So we kind of took a little bit of a cue from all of those things. I remember Dig was a big inspiration that kind of burst onto the scene. You know, the first version of Dig with Kevin Rose, and he was an icon for us at the time and a model. And so we talked a lot about we had things like collaborative editing, which we borrowed from Wikipedia. We had kind of a voting algorithm, which we borrowed from Dig, and all these ideas that we jumbled together. But it really, the thing that mattered the most was building that community. And a few things that we did really worked well. Number one, we were just very involved in it ourselves. Like I said, we were the first writers. We kind of brought in our friends first to be part of that early community.
Yeah.
So once we were able to start opening it up to more people, there wasn't as much of that chicken and the egg issue of you don't have much activity because you don't have many people, but you can't get people because there's not activity. We already had kind of generated that, and we were very involved with all of the newcomers and kind of cultivated a real community feel, which over time became harder to keep in place. And some of the early people, eventually, as we grew, got a little disillusioned and whatnot. But that happened. So that was big. And even as the company grew and the other founders and I started to take on roles that were more dispersed across the business, we always had one of our co-founders focus only on community building, and that was his key role. And he was kind of our Tom from MySpace. He was the guy who was friends with everyone when they first joined, and was welcomed everyone into the community. So that was huge. And the other thing we did is just we tried a lot of things. I wrote a blog post about this on my site davenemetz.com. Check it out. And
we'll give you some time to pitch that shortly.
Yeah, just getting my plugs in while I can. We tried a lot of different things. We posted on Craigslist to get people to join. We forwarded emails to everyone we knew and asked them to just send us people. We advertised on Facebook when Facebook literally had just launched their first ad product, and we said, "Oh, this is interesting. Like maybe we can target people at different colleges." I don't think Facebook hadn't even opened up to non-college students. So we tried all sorts of different things just to spread the word and to seed that initial community of the first several hundred people on the site.
And at the time, like this sounds like a lot of work. Like were you balancing your day job and doing this in the night? Like was there a point where you realized that like you're burning the midnight oil and you had to like make a choice? How are you balancing these things at the same time?
Yeah, so it was about an 8 or 9 month period from when we first launched that initial site, and where I was still working at Endeavor, and my other co-founders were still working at their first jobs out of college, and we were kind of balancing this. And I remember during my breaks at work, I would sneak off and go down to the alley behind the building where other people took their smoke breaks, and I was on my cell phone chatting with my founders about something. I remember doing the thing where I'd have a window open of my personal email and doing correspondence back and forth with people I was working on the site with while I was at work, and then having to quickly close that and open up my work email if my boss walked by, all that kind of stuff. And I was young. I was 22. I didn't know social life, but I had to sacrifice a lot of regular 22-year-old social life to do this. I remember at the time I had friends who were working other jobs out of college, and I'd tell them this thing I was working on and doing, and I couldn't go out tonight because I've got to work on this. And I'd get some funny looks, and a lot of people, they kind of like, "Oh, why are you wasting your time with that?" And even continued long after I left Endeavor and committed to it full time, and people just kind of said, "Oh yeah, go do that," and we'll see how that goes, and still got a lot of funny looks. And eventually that started to change. But yeah, that time was it was a lot of just trying to push things forward to the point where eventually we started to see the potential in it and kind of had to make that decision around, all right, should we commit to this full
And
time?
yeah, and how do you kind of keep conviction in yourself when you're getting those funny looks?
uh I was just really passionate about it, and I think it helped having some friends that I was working on it with too. So at least they bought into it, and we took it pretty seriously. Maybe a little too seriously sometimes, uh, but 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 that helped a lot. And not everyone felt that way. We had some people who believed in us, and who helped us out in the early days, and that encouraged us too. And we had one of my co-founders, his cousin had was one of the co-founders at College Humor, and had was kind of a few years ahead of us and had built that. We remembered when he had been in our shoes, and that he had been just a few friends working on a small project that only we and a handful of other people knew about, and we saw kind of the progression there. So that gave us a lot of belief that we could do it too. And there were definitely a lot of times where I just wanted to forget about it and live a regular 22-year-old's life and move on. But we built up enough momentum that that it kept us going.
Yeah. And what was the inflection point of momentum? Like, did you, when you, after like, I don't know, 8, 9 months, you guys thought, okay, we have this number of users, we see this traction level, therefore you've now got to the point where you can say, okay, I'm going to quit my job and do this full time. Like, how did you like come to that decision? Like, was it from a metric perspective about momentum or just gut feeling?
There were definitely metric points that we felt were, wow, this is really real. This is really happening, which looking back in hindsight, pitifully small, but at the time they seemed to, I remember it may have been our first time we had 10,000 unique visitors in a month, which
Yeah.
we were like, whoa, there's 10,000 people coming to our website. This is a huge deal. Things are happening.
Yeah.
And looking back, it's like, wow, we had a long, long way to go from there until it was really something. But it was enough to really get us excited and to see the potential. But there wasn't one point where we said, hey, if we get it to this point, then we're going all in. It was really more of a gut feel and kind of a what do I have to lose type thing.
Yeah.
And part of it for me personally was being in that environment where if I stayed on the path at Endeavor, I knew I had to depend on, some of it was on myself and kind of and my work ethic and everything, but a lot of it was based on the gatekeepers ahead of me, on working my way up at the agency, eventually trying to go, leverage that to hop into another job. And I even I worked at this or I joined this committee that they were starting at Endeavor, which was focused all around trying to figure out digital media, because digital was just starting to become a thing again. So I saw it as maybe my opportunity to get my foot further in the door, and I joined this committee, and it was just eye opening in terms of realizing, compared to what I was doing on my own, they still had so far to go in terms of really being able to get a grasp on the potential for digital media. They were thinking about it still very transactionally and not super creatively for their clients, and they've done a phenomenal job. So the industry caught up, but seeing that, it really helped me think about it. Like, I can stay here and try to work my way up in this industry where uh, I've got a lot of gatekeepers ahead of me and a lot of things holding me back, or I can realize that I've already got something going that if I go all in on, I can control, and I can really see the upside. And again, the downside for me was I was 22. I wasn't really making much money at Endeavor anyway. They pay you, basically minimum wage for those jobs, and it's all about the experience and the access. So worst case scenario, it didn't work out, and I go get another entertainment industry job. I didn't have a mortgage, I didn't have a family, so I was lucky in that regard that had the ability to go all in. I moved back in with my parents, and
Yeah.
the whole thing. So it was a good time in my life to be able to commit and do something like that.
Yeah.
That's
So
amazing. And I guess
yeah.
I love what you said about if you find yourself stuck climbing the career ladder, get off and build an elevator. I think that just really resonates with me. I absolutely love that. Is there anyone who you think shouldn't take that advice?
Um, Look, everyone's situation is different, and I won't say that if you're going into a field like medicine, if you're going into if you have a very set aspiration of a certain field where you have to climb the career ladder or you have to pay your dues, my hat's off to you. But I think a lot of people feel like they're stuck in a role, or they just need that extra experience, or they need to wait until they've achieved a certain level of comfort, to be able to try that thing that they really wanted to do. And I think the reality is that the further you pursue that kind of idea, the harder it then becomes to pull yourself away from it and take yourself on a different path. And I think one of the things that excites me about the creator economy, and I know a lot of other people, is it's showing a path for a lot of people to pursue projects that they're interested in, pursue different ways of making money, of making a living for themselves, that don't require being on a career path, or that you can even do if you're on that path and you can carve out time to create something on your own and start to develop a way to make money off of it. So I think that it was true back then, and it was something that we were able to do back then, even though a lot of this stuff wasn't in place. And it's even more true today, just because of all of these tools and all the communities and all the possibility that's out there.
And I think there's like a level of catharsis and true like self-actualization that comes when you take that big leap to actually try to do something yourself, whether you want to go off and become a writer, content creator of any type. It allows you to do things that are probably more true to you. Now to close off on this like first transition moment in your life, before we move on to the next one, do you remember a particular like moment or story where you felt like, okay, I've like crossed the Rubicon, I've decided to go all in on this Bleacher Report thing, like gritting your teeth and saying, okay, this is it, I've made the big decision?
Yeah, no, one story that sticks out, is we once I quit the job, and I was living in LA. I moved back in with my parents, in the Bay Area. My other co-founders did as well, and we each kind of did it at different points. It took a little cajoling to get everyone to 100% commit, but it was a little bit of a, once the dominoes started to fall, it worked. So we decided we wanted to we decided we want to have an office. We didn't want to work out of our parents' houses or anything like that. So we found this tiny windowless office a couple blocks from our high school. It had no air conditioning. It was the middle of the summer in Northern California, so it was brutally hot in there. But it was one of those humble beginnings, types of things that really we felt like, okay, we're starting here, and we're putting in the time, and we're going to be able to look back on this and say that this was where it all started. And we very much bought into the whole mythology of the startup. So we were inspired by the story of Amazon and Bezos, and when they started, how they built all their desks out of
Yeah.
old doors. And it was, so I got some old doors off of Craigslist for free, and along with a lot of, we found some free whiteboards off of Craigslist that we went and picked up somewhere. So everything was free that we furnished our office with. We got the old doors and we built desks out of them. And I used I can't remember what it's, some kind of industrial glue or something that I bought at the hardware store. And we're sitting in that windowless office with no ventilation, building these doors, inhaling these fumes. And I think about halfway through building it, I felt like I was about to pass out, and the thought starts crossing my mind: am I going to die before even getting to really like launch this company? But fortunately, at least as far as I know, the fumes did not have any lasting effects. But that was a real moment where I was like, all right, we're really doing this.
Yeah, that's an amazing point of the mythology of Bleacher Report. Now, if we fast forward a few years here, so obviously the Bleacher Report story itself, I mean, that's probably like a 10-hour separate podcast. We'll do that separately. But it seems to have culminated in this one point where you sold the company. Could you explain, like, I guess leading up to that, how did this come about? What's the story behind that? And what was going through your head? What had you had to overcome in order to get to that point?
Yeah, so there's the old saying that companies aren't sold, they're bought. And that was definitely true of Bleacher Report. And we had tried to sell the company many times before, not in a way where we were desperate to sell or we were shopping or anything, but we were young founders, and we idolized places like ESPN, and we had a couple bits of interest from some of the big sports players pretty early on in Bleacher Report's life. And man, we were somewhat naive, but we were so excited. We went into those being like, wow, this could be really it. This could be the big moment where everything changes for Bleacher Report and where we really do it. And we went into those meetings just setting ourselves up for disappointment, and coming out, of course, having been through those now on both sides all the time. Bigger companies like to bring in, start newer startups and do fishing expeditions or kick the tires or whatever. And we very much were reading into things too much. So having been through that a few times early on, over time we got much more I guess realistic about things, and as we had more success, we really started to see the long-term potential. So by the time we come around to when the company eventually sold, we'd been at it for 6 or 7 years. We had been building the company very slowly, and then all of a sudden it started to take off, and was taking off like a rocket ship. And this is around 2010, 2011. Everything was just clicking. We were growing like crazy, audience wise. Revenue was taking off. We were becoming profitable. The company size was growing. We were bringing in all these great big name executives to our exec team. And we'd gone from this unknown startup to this big overnight success that a lot of people knew about, which was awesome. And on the heels of all that, we ended up raising, for us, was a really big round of funding. It was our first, or I guess our second true venture round, but we raised about 20 million. It was led by Oak, and they had been a big investor in Huffington Post, and had some other big wins in our category. And this was our money that we were going to use to go out and really turn the company into the next ESPN. And we were really aligned behind this idea of going all in and going the distance. And about 6 months after we closed that round, we had a meeting with Turner that we thought was going to be a biz dev meeting, that turned into them expressing interest in buying the company. And so that led to this whole long courtship of them expressing interest in us, and us talking to them, and us at certain points stepping back, and then the same, and eventually culminated in them buying us about 9 months later. So which ended up being a great deal, and part of that was because we were so committed to the plan that we were on that they really had to put something in front of us that made a ton of sense, because we weren't thinking about selling in that moment. But yeah, it was also 6-7 years into building, so it was very cathartic, the deal aside, to just get to that point and really be able to put an exclamation point on it.
Yeah, you mentioned that there was a time when everything kind of started to click. What happened? How did that happen?
So some of it was micro and some of it was macro. So we launched the first version of Bleacher Report in 2006. That was kind of the very bare bones basic version. We ended up leaving our jobs and going all in on it in 2007, and we launched a more substantial version and then raised our first angel round. After that, that took us to middle of 2008, and all of a sudden the economy crashed and everything. Sequoia put out the RIP Good Times a presentation, and it was a very dark time. And we were fortunate to have some money in the bank then, but things were moving very slowly in the economy. Then it was very hard for us to establish our business model and our prospects were fairly dim. So while we were doing that, we got very scrappy. We really figured out a model of how to get the most growth and really build the brand without spending a lot of money. And we also really use that time to solve a lot of underlying issues with how we ran the business, and to really figure out product market fit, or whatever you want to call it. So while all that was happening, then all of a sudden in 2010, the economy started to revive and things started to open up. Advertisers started to spend money again. Not that they weren't spending money, but they started to take more chances, and digital was really starting to take off. And so all that was happening right as we had survived this long winter, and had really, I would say, outlasted a lot of other competitors who didn't make it through, or we were just able to, because of our scrappiness, get through all that in a much stronger way. And we really kind of hit our stride, internally, right as those external factors were really starting to work in our favor. Another big one being the shift to mobile, which we saw early on. We saw a lot. We were mostly desktop, and then as mobile really started to rise, we saw most of our audience shift to mobile. We figured out how to monetize that, and we launched a mobile app pretty early, that we were really able to leverage the growth there, and kind of hit that at the right point. So all that was happening, right around the same time in 2010, and we were fortunate to be in a point where we could just kind of keep doubling down on the things that were working.
Seems like the sale at that point was like the culmination of like such a long, arduous journey over many years, of course, and the ups and the downs. When you got to that point, how did you feel about like what's next? Is it like, okay, Bleacher Report, like I'm staying on, the sale just signifies a new stage in the company's career, or did you see it as like, it's maybe this is a signal for me to move on to something new? Like what did it represent to you, like for the rest of your life, when you thought about what the sale of Bleacher Report meant?
So I was ready to move on. I was ready to do something new. And I think part of this was I was young. I had spent pretty much all my 20s focusing on this one thing. And I think I was ready to do something different. And I felt like it had kind of consumed me for so long that we got it to a finish line. And there were also some things going on in terms of the internal politics at the company as things grew, and it feeling less like a startup and more like a bigger company that I didn't feel as at home in that kind of environment. and of course we were then going to be swallowed up by an even bigger company, and it just didn't feel like the thing that I wanted to do. Now in hindsight, maybe with some more maturity, maybe I would have done something differently, but I think I was also ready to just hit pause and kind of take a refresh after so many years working on this and putting my all into it. So I did step back, and I talked about this as well in one of my newsletters, but I experienced this thing called the arrival fallacy, where you work so hard working towards a goal, and it's kind of all you think about. And for me, that is selling, but I guess just achieving some level of success. As a founder, you always have people always ask you about your exit strategy, and maybe selling and maybe something else, but you want to be building towards something. And this was kind of the success that we were building towards. And then you finally get to that point, and you're kind of left thinking, what's next? And that can be sometimes a very empty feeling, because you don't have that goal that you've been striving for so long, or that thing that consumed you for so long. So I experienced that, and when I stepped away, and it took a while to start to put the pieces together and figure out what's next was. And I sometimes talk about it. That was kind of my wandering through the desert time of not really knowing what I was going to do, and knowing that I kind of wanted to take some time off, but having a little bit of a void, a vacuum in my life around where I was going next. So it was both an incredible time, and a time of really feeling a lot of gratitude around the success that we had, but also kind of a jarring experience to have.
Yeah. So what did you do then? Did you literally like take time off? Did you travel? Did you get into yoga? Did you just say, I'm gonna like disconnect from the business world, go read some books? Like in terms of like the immediate next step, right? I feel like it's interesting to see like how do you deal with that sort of arrival fallacy, like practically?
So the day I officially left Bleacher Report, and sent I hit send on my farewell note to the team, sitting on the tarmac of a flight to Japan, and
What a bad place to do it.
Yeah, so that was great, and that was part of the thing. It was like I need to just get completely out and into a new headspace. So my wife and I we went on a trip around, this before we had kids. We went on a trip around Southeast Asia to Japan, and then Southeast Asia for a couple months. And this was it was a bucket list thing. It was also I can finally just let go and do something, and not be thinking about why is our traffic down this week, or what's going on with the next round of funding that we're in the middle of raising, and could completely forget about those types of things. And it was almost a little bit of a callback to that backpacking trip around Asia, or around Europe, that I did right after college, when I was also in a mode of thinking about what to do next, and ultimately started working on Bleacher Report at the end of that. So that was good to just completely get out and be able to just have a completely new perspective on things. But I think for me, coming back, once I came back from that trip, I didn't really have a plan about what I was going to do next. It was, all right, I'll figure it out, and that, I think in hindsight, it was less intentional and more just winging it of, oh, I'm going to I'll spend some time brainstorming. I'll take meetings with people. I'll kind of just take things as they come and see what happens. And so it was definitely a period where I felt very unmoored, in professionally, but also just in life, and not knowing what I was going to do next, or what what my purpose was or what
Yeah.
my next goal was. It felt very uncomfortable to be sitting in that place for that next period.
After feeling so unmoored, you then at one point in a span of a year became a dad, started a second company, and moved from San Francisco to New York. Was that immediately afterwards? Like, what was the story behind that? Which I guess is like your third big transition moment.
Yeah. So there was about a year and a half in between that, and where I did some traveling, like the Asia trip. You mentioned earlier, I'm a big Grateful Dead fan, also a big
Yeah.
Fish fan. Fortunately, caught one of Fish's best tours in recent memory in 2013. So some highlights there that were good timing for me. But I spent a lot of time going off on different directions that ultimately didn't feel right. I started dabbling in investing and did some angel investments and thought, oh, maybe I'll become an investor and talk to some VCs and considered like an EIR or kind of a venture partner type thing, and that just didn't feel right. So I kind of reeled it back in, and I continued to angel invest, but is more of a side thing for me as opposed to something that would be my number one thing. I started advising companies, which was really interesting. I thought it would be a good way to just learn about different companies and maybe one that I'd more involved with, or maybe something that would help spark an idea around something that I would want to do. And there were a couple that I actually got pretty deeply involved with, which was another challenge of the period of being able to kind of sit back and not just try to get busy for busy's sake. And I'm a type of person who just, I get interested in something, I just very quickly start to go all in on it. And so I found myself doing that with a couple of the companies that I was advising, where I got in pretty deep with them, and at a certain point realized, oh, these are interesting things, but this is not what I want to be doing. Or were red flags that I missed because I was just so excited about jumping into something. So I was in this weird kind of phase where I was dipping in and out of different things, and then ultimately decided to launch Inverse, and I. I think actually becoming a dad. It was all very tied together. So I was in the process of starting a family. I wasn't a dad yet, but I think I realized that, hey, I'm getting into a mode of life where, unlike my earlier self launching Bleacher Report, I do have more responsibilities. I have more things I need to take care of. I need to figure this out, and it's going to be a lot harder to figure something out when I've got a new baby, and life is even more serious and demanding. So started thinking about Inverse, and started really thinking about, I want to work on something that I'm not getting pulled into something that I just kind of am latching onto because it's out there, but something that I really believe in and I want to do. And I want to get it together in a very intentional way. Um, and that led me back to looking at, all right, let me draw on my history, my background building media companies. And so I decided to launch a new media company called Inverse. And around the same time, one of my co-founders of Inverse, who was a lead engineer at Bleacher Report, was just leaving Bleacher and Turner and thinking about starting something new as well. So we started some of those conversations, and that led to us launching that, which I started working on the company while before I was a dad, but my first child was born a few weeks before we actually launched Inverse officially. So that was an interesting time, and just kind of a crazy time, but it all kind of ties that phase of my life together very well in my memory. And then about a year later, I decided to move both my family and the company from San Francisco to New York, which was another huge transition that all kind of snowballed together.
There's a lot going on there. So just tell us
Yeah.
about Inverse. Like what is the company? What do you do?
So Inverse is a media company that covers science and science fiction essentially, and covers both the real world of progress and the world of possibility. And a big inspiration for Inverse was a publication called Omni Magazine, which I was obsessed with as a kid. And again, that, yeah, as part of that whole soul searching period, I thought about, all right, what led me to start Bleacher Report is, I was a huge sports fan as a kid. I was read Sports Illustrated. I watched Sports Center religiously, and Bleacher Report was putting my own spin on it. And that led me to think about some of my other passions and interests, and what other media categories were ripe for a refresh. And Omni was this magazine that was around in like the 80s and the early 90s. It was actually launched by Bob Guccione, the founder of Penthouse, and it was kind of his more legit or one of his more legit properties. But it was this fascinating combination of really far out there science stories, along with original science fiction and kind of more fantastical stuff. And they had these great covers that were, kind of future visions and illustrations and things like that. So I was obsessed with it as a kid. And Wired magazine was kind of a later iteration that was a little bit more tech and more real than fiction, but was kind of a next gen of that in some ways. So I created Inverse as a digital media company, following a very similar playbook as Bleacher Report, focused on this category with the insight that there was just a massively underserved market of young people who were both interested in science and technology, driven by the rise of digital, driven by, kind of the influence of technology in every facet of our lives, who culturally were also obsessed with science fiction and comic books and all of these cultural icons that had once been fringe and kind of for the nerds, that are now the mainstream and for everyone. So I had the idea of putting those together in a publication that could speak to this new audience.
That's so fascinating. I love that. And just between this and Bleacher Report, you've really sat at the intersection between creating and the passion economy as well. And obviously with new platforms like On Deck, Substack coming out, what do you make of this whole space of kind of the overlap of passion and creating?
We're at a really interesting inflection point. There is it's really interesting to me because I've seen multiple waves of this. Like I said, when we launched Bleacher Report, it was kind of the first wave of Web 2.0 and these online communities and things like Dig and Reddit launching, and Wikipedia and blogs becoming a more mainstream thing. And then that wave went up and down, and we saw some of these communities balloon into massive social media sites that have had very unexpected impacts on society and all sorts of things. We saw a lot of these blogs and smaller content sites turn into really big, massive operations like BuzzFeed or like BDG. And at the same time as that sector grew, media became a very challenged industry where a ton of money and venture capital flowed into it, and there were a lot of very uh, well publicized issues in terms of those companies not panning out or shutting down overnight, or all sorts of things, where media became a very tough space to be in. And so that's kind of the most recent reference point that I have for the space. But then in the last couple of years, there's been this great resurgence and kind of rebirth of the individual creator and empowering people with tools to do things on a smaller scale that don't require venture capital. In fact, they let people avoid it and still have great success. And it's kind of the pendulum swinging back to the way things were in those earlier days. And I think it's really encouraging, and it's great to see that in some ways the web is returning to those earlier ideas of it, where it is a platform and it is a medium where anyone can express themselves, and anyone can build an audience and now make a living for themselves because those tools are more readily available. So I'm incredibly encouraged by it, and yeah, I think we're going to see new types of media companies be built that are going to look very different than the media companies that I built, or the media companies of the legacy years.
Right, and one thing we were speaking about before was, that there's this saying that, every company is a media company now. What does that actually mean to you?
I think it's every company or every person has the ability to shape their message online, to build an audience, to go direct. We used to, even at Bleacher Report, or the early days at Inverse, even though we were media companies, we used to spend so much time trying to think about PR and how do we get our story out there, and how do we again deal with those gatekeepers in the mainstream press to get the word out about what we were doing. And it's so funny now to think about that. Why do you even bother with that when you can get your message out there directly? You can build your audience directly, and you can leverage all these tools to have a direct one-to-one relationship with your audience. And I think there are a lot of examples of people who are doing that, who are not ultimately media companies, or media where media isn't their end goal, but they're building their business, they're building their career, they're building their platform with a media audience building mentality. And I think there's a lot happening right now that is happening right now with a subset of people who are doing that. That's going to just become the way things are done.
Are there certain people or new media companies that in particular you admire or find most exciting? And also, like, maybe as an add-on to that question, how about an underrated one? Like, maybe there's some obvious ones where people recognize the names, but maybe there's a couple that in your head are like, most people aren't aware of this person or this kind of company. So what would those be?
Put me on the spot here. So
Sorry.
it's all good. It's all good. One I like to talk about. I went on his podcast not too long ago. Anthony Pompliano. I think he is someone that I remember very early on when he started doing his thing on Twitter, and kind of being the cheerleader for Bitcoin, and building a personality around himself. And this was when his following was very small, and it was easy to dismiss, or easy to kind of laugh at and say, "Oh, who is this guy?" What, it's kind of he's really leaning into this, but you got to respect the game and the dedication. And I think he just posted a kind of end of year review on what he's done in terms of building his audience and all the channels that he's built out. And incredibly impressive, and something where he's executing at a higher level than a lot of established media companies. And certainly it's not just him alone. I know he has a team and he has help, but he's effectively it's a one-man operation. And I think there's a lot to take away there, that both in terms of the dedication of seeing this vision, committing to it, not listening to the haters and just going for it, and really sticking to the process and making it work, and the time that he's put in. So I think that's a great example. And then you look at the fact that, well, I'm sure he makes some money directly off of his media efforts. That's really not the end goal for him. He's an investor first, and this is all thinking about, how do I leverage building an audience? How do I leverage media in order to build something, or to build value that can then flow into my main focus. So yeah, I look at him, and there are a lot of people like that who are now seeing this and doing it
Quick shout out to
on their own scale. Or
his fantastic wife Polina as well, who was our first ever guest on the podcast.
Yep.
There you go. Yeah. So yeah, I think I see people following that model, that playbook, and again, it's not going to work for everyone, or everyone has to find what works for them. But I think it shows that you find that niche, you commit to yourself, and you have to go all in on it, and stick to the process, stick to what works. Another founder or media brand I'm just a massive fan of, is Webb Smith at 2 p.m. And again, Webb, I remember meeting, it was pretty early on at Inverse. I think he was still working, kind of more on, he wasn't working on 2 p.m. full time. It was like a side thing. He was working in the D2C world. And we were chatting about some things, and 2 p.m. was just this side thing that he was doing, and he mentioned to me, and I signed up, and I was like, oh, this is cool, it's interesting, I'll keep tabs on it. And just watching that evolution of him committing to it, him finding his stride, and building it into something, and to the point where he could leave and work on it full time. Then he could build other businesses on top of it. He could build additional communities on top of it, and seeing that trajectory, it has been just incredible to watch.
Amazing. Well, it's a super exciting time for the media industry, and I think everybody here on this interview is definitely bullish, and really excited to see what happens. I feel like there's so much excitement. Also, the fact that I think COVID probably accelerates a lot of this stuff. Like the idea of, let's say, someone becoming a podcaster or writer, that it's still fringe and requires a lot of bravery. But sometimes you think about the last 10 months kind of pushing people just sometimes out of necessity, or just the fact that the world's changed. To end each interview, Dave, we have a tradition before giving some shout outs and stuff. We've got 2 questions that we ask each guest. And should I do the first one, Ben? You can do the second one? Okay. First one is, what is your favorite rom-com?
Let me think about that.
I love the lean back that we get from every guest on that. It's like,
you're
in some
a big
ways, the
film
most
guy.
thought-provoking question we've asked.
So I'm gonna admit, as much of a film guy as I am,
Yeah.
I'm not a huge rom-com guy.
All good.
No shame in that, but I'm gonna go with what I consider a very offbeat rom-com, and one of my very offbeat, I will say, one of my favorite movies of all time, The Graduate.
Nice.
What's a better romantic comedy than just a young college graduate having a sordid affair with one of his parents' friends, and then her daughter. But yeah, one of my all-time favorite movies. I think it's brilliant.
That's a new one. I have to check that out. Never seen it.
You should watch
Classic.
it. The laughs are, it's not a slapstick rom-com. The laughs are but they're there. They're there. Check it out, and we can talk about it sometime.
Love it. And the second question we go for is, what advice would you give your 18-year-old self?
Think back to when I was 18. Just in
Life, love, business, happiness, it can be anything.
Yeah. You know, things have worked out pretty well, and so I wouldn't want to change the course too much. But I would tell myself to stop every once in a while and savor it and to slow down and be present, be mindful. Uh, Something it's I feel like it's a little bit of a cliche almost now to talk about mindfulness and meditation, especially on a podcast focused around Silicon Valley and creativity and all that stuff. But that shit really works, and it's something that I've gotten into over the last few years, has really gotten me through a lot. And I think a lot about my younger years and my younger self, when I was either all over the place or going through ups and downs, or life was crazy and going a million miles a minute, and just thinking, wow, I really like stop to like slow down and really think about things.
Right.
And that might have helped me get through some of those tougher moments in a more balanced, more sane way. So I'd say that.
Love that.
Wonderful.
And how did you access that? Like, how did you get into it?
So I just started. I heard everyone talking about meditating, and it's something I was always a little curious about, but never quite knew where to start. And I uh, remember being in a conversation with a couple other uh, CEOs about some big problem that one of them was going through, and the other one said, "Well, have you tried meditating?" And the answers, or that question seemed almost like, how would meditating help them with that problem? But I thought,
Yeah.
well, I might as well give it a try. And I wasn't even the one. I had my own problems, but that kind of stuck with me. I was like, well, maybe I should just give this a shot. And so I downloaded a few of the meditation apps and tried a few of them, found one that I liked, and just decided to commit to it. And uh, it hasn't been no new door of perception has completely opened up for me. I'd need something a little bit stronger to get that. But it has been just a great, kind of presence in my life to help remind me to slow down, think about things, and be mindful and present.
Love it. And
Awesome.
actually, the one thing we haven't asked you to do yet is we give a 60-second window for a pitch on anything you want. So 60 seconds, what is it? And tell us about it.
Yeah, so I've mentioned my site, my newsletter a couple of times, and as I've been building these other media companies and in this world for so long, I've often been kind of behind the scenes one of the people putting things together, but I haven't really been out front and center since those early days of Bleacher Report when I was writing for the site. So about 6 months ago, I decided to join the creator economy a little bit,
Nice.
and I set up my site at davenemetz.com. I'm doing a weekly newsletter now. It's primarily focused on media, startup stories, talk about mindset, talk about creative process, and really draw on my experience at Bleacher Report and Inverse and just across the board. And so I would recommend anyone to go check it out. So you can sign up there if you like it. Follow me on Twitter at Dave Nemetz as well. And that's kind of my project right now of being in creative mode.
Amazing. Thank you. DaveNemetz.com to everybody listening. And thank you, Dave, for being on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks.
It's a lot of fun.